Good evening, and thank you for attending. My name is Leslie Kane, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. Before we begin, please make sure to silence all your phones and electronic devices, and additionally, please refrain from any interruptions to the debate as it is being recorded for on-demand viewing and post-captioning services. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor for this evening's event. And the Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and public education measure initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. The system provides clean funding for qualified participating candidates who agree to abide by the Citizens Clean Election Act and rules. These include contribution and spending limits, foregoing special interest money, and participating in commission debates. We do encourage audience questions, so please utilize the note card given to you when you entered the room and hold it up. And our volunteers will pick up the cards and deliver them to me. And if you need additional cards, please feel free to raise your hand and just ask. And if you have a question for a specific candidate, please include the candidate's name on the note card, and it will be considered during the second half of the debate. Understand that we do screen questions for clarity and to eliminate duplications, speeches, and/or personal attacks on candidates. The debate's scheduled for approximately 60 minutes, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight's debate includes 1-minute opening statements, and the first half of the debate begins with 2 minutes to each candidate to answer the same question. And after each candidate has responded to the question, the first responding candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds, and we'll rotate which candidate responds first. The second half of the debate will allow a different question per candidate with 1 minute to answer. Additionally, there'll be an optional 30-second comment. And then finally, we'll have 1-minute closing statements. We ask that you remain polite to all the candidates and give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing, no matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with anything being said tonight. Tonight's participants are Ms. Kathy Moore Almeida, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Senator, District 25, and Mr. Johnny Martin, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 25. The order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name. We'll start with the Senate for opening comments and then progress from there. And then the second half will be determined by reverse alphabetical order by last name, starting with the House. So Kathy, will you start the opening remarks, please?
I certainly will, thank you. Good evening, my name is Kathy Moore Almeida. I wish to offer my thanks to the Clean Elections Commission for this opportunity to speak, as well as to those of you who have come to this forum. I'm running for state senate here in our community because, like you, I love Arizona, and I'm running to be the leader. I want our state to be the leader in sustainable energy and education. I'm frustrated with our state legislature because there's a lack of a sustainable funding source for our schools. I'm frustrated by the priorities our legislators take to the Capitol every day. It's clear to me that our legislators are not responsive to the will of the people. I am running to bring new leadership to the state capitol and to represent the values and priorities that are valuable to us because we deserve great responsive representation. A little bit about me. I have lived in Legislative District 25 for 25 years. I've been married to my wonderful husband, Johnny, for that amount of time, and together we have an amazing 16-year-old daughter, Anna Rose. She attends the IB program at Westwood High School. I settled in Mesa because I love Arizona and I love the people who live here. I attended Arizona State University for my undergraduate work, Prescott College for my teaching credentials, and my bilingual endorsement and master's degree in psychology, and Union Institute University for my doctoral studies in interdisciplinary studies with a concentration in psychology.
Thank you. And Johnny.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, folks. My name is Johnny Martin, and I'm running for Arizona's House of Representatives here in District 25. Before I begin, I really want to just quickly say happy birthday to my mom. She's not in the room with us, but I think she may be watching this later, as she is a Republican voter in this district whose son is running as a Democrat. I want to just briefly introduce myself. As I said, my name is Johnny Martin. I am a proud product of Arizona's public schools. Not only am I a product of Arizona's public schools, but I'm currently finishing up my degree at Arizona State University. So I am also a public school student. And my background is in the interfaith movement. So I've been involved for a number of years bringing people together in our community who have different religious or non-religious identities and backgrounds, and encouraging them to find common ground and to learn more about each other's worldviews and beliefs. Now, I have very specific legislative goals that I would like to accomplish as a representative in the legislature, and I hope to be able to share that with you today.
Thank you, Johnny. And at this time, we will begin the portion of the debate where each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the same question. So we will begin with our first question and start with Johnny. Johnny, what are your priorities on introducing legislation if elected?
Great question, and that's kind of where I just left off, so I'm happy to continue. My number one priority is funding Arizona's public schools. And I think that this is something that is important to people who live in this district, regardless of what party they're registered with, regardless of their ideology, because people know that strong schools equal safe neighborhoods. And that's really what we're getting after here. And for me, the first step in improving our public schools in Arizona is giving our teachers the pay raise that they deserve. So I've proudly taken the Invest in Ed pledge. I was a supporter of Save Our Schools, and I'm really eager to make sure that we can solve the many issues facing our students and teachers in the state. Another issue that's very important for me is introducing legislation to put a ban on private prisons in Arizona. It is an industry that I am fundamentally opposed to. I don't believe there should be a profit-making incentive on putting people in jail. And unfortunately, it's become a bigger and bigger problem here in Arizona as the private prison lobby has grown. You may or may not know this, but Arizona is the fourth most incarcerated, or has the fourth highest population of incarcerated individuals in the United States. And so this is something we can address at the state legislature, and it's something I would be eager to do. There are many other issues, I think, facing our state, and it's impossible to get through them all in the short time we have to speak. But I'd be happy to answer any specific questions that folks may have, and I'm eager to share more about my platform for Arizona.
Thank you, Johnny. Kathy, same question.
Well, I have two most important issues. The first, the immediate one is fully funded public education, and the second is clean air. I'd like to speak a little bit about the clean air. This issue is paramount because we're in the midst of an epic climate crisis, and will only get worse if we take no action to mitigate it. In order to clean the air, I would work closely with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and reestablish the clean air standards we previously had in place. I strongly support actions to reduce carbon emissions from power plants and to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. I would support legislation which requires that the ADEQ establish a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan for Arizona that is aggressive and addresses this issue with the time sensitivity and seriousness it requires. There's no reason why Arizona should continue to produce power with fossil fuels. While moving from coal-fired to natural power plants is an improvement, and simply is not sufficient for Arizona to meet its obligations in curbing climate change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Johnny, your 30-second response.
Yeah, you know, it's been a really great experience for me being able to run alongside Dr. Cathy Moore Almeida, since she is the Democratic candidate for the Senate and I am for the House. I've actually learned quite a bit from her about this issue, and I also am in support of clean energy, clean air, and clean water. And I look forward to taking Cathy's lead as she continues to teach me more about this issue.
Thank you. Next question is, candidates, education's been a very hot topic throughout our debate season. How important is education to you? Kathy, can you really elaborate on that, please?
Sure, thank you. So public education is incredibly important. That's the short answer. It's absolutely paramount that we fund our schools. Public schools are the cornerstones of our communities. And if Arizona is going to attract high-paying jobs, we need to have excellent education, excellent schools, so that we can ensure that we can train a workforce that's ready for the jobs of this century. We can't do that when our educators cross state lines and receive a significant pay raise. We need a dedicated revenue source that doesn't fluctuate with the ups and downs of the economy. We need to move away from sales tax to something more sustainable. And right now, we're throwing away money on for-profit prisons, which could go towards education. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yeah, public education is crucially important. And I mean, for me, it is personal because I've been a public school student here in Arizona. And I got to tell you, if the students are keenly aware that our teachers are dramatically underpaid, it's not something that is lost on students in our schools. Now, for me, as I said before, that's step one. There are a number of other issues that we have to address. Class sizes, for example. Classes are growing in size year after year because we don't have enough teachers. We also don't have the resources in the budget that's needed to make sure that we can reduce class sizes and that every student has access to these opportunities. Ultimately, when it comes to legislation, we need to make sure that we have the funding available for our students and teachers, and that means that we need to address the lack of revenue in the state budget. There simply isn't enough money to pay for the things that we so desperately need right now. In order to get there, a lot of people are thinking that it's going to require us to raise everybody's taxes. But if you look at Arizona's tax code, that simply isn't true. We have huge tax cuts and tax breaks that have been given to corporations and wealthy private interests over the years. And these things have stacked up such that that's where all the missing revenue has gone. It's not coming out of the pockets of people in this room. It's coming out of the profit of these massive corporations that have basically lobbied legislators year after year to take their interests first and to basically ignore the interests of the rest of us, students, teachers, parents whose kids are in schools. So that's what I would like to do.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
I'd like to mention that I used to be a teacher in Mesa Public Schools. I taught English as second language, so I know firsthand what it is to not have enough resources in the classroom. I remember when I was teaching, teachers routinely spent, and this was back in 95, 96, teachers routinely spent about $400 a year out of pocket on classroom costs. I'm sure it's much higher now, and we absolutely must have fully funded public education because that's what our children deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of resources, some constituents are of the opinion that water should be one of our greatest concerns. And there are many people who are very, very concerned about the state of our water situation here in Arizona. How can we keep development going knowing that our water is running out? Johnny?
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I think is only recently actually hit my radar as I've been in this process of running for office and I've learned more about the history of our state's water policy. We are trying to ensure that there is sustainability, that clean water is going to be available, not just now, but long into the future, right? We want to have like 100 years into the future planned for where our water comes from and to make sure that we have clean water and that it's accessible to everyone who needs it. Now, I just want to say one thing about this, which is, and it's kind of interesting, I'm taking a course right now at Arizona State University that's on, it's actually about Southwest home gardening. It's kind of out of my wheelhouse a little bit. What I've learned in this class actually is really interesting is, you all know we live in a desert. So the water situation here is very unique. It's not like the water situation in neighboring states. And so we need to have an Arizona-specific plan for how we're going to address this. We can't necessarily just look at models from other states, but we need to understand not only the history of water policy in Arizona, but what is the best way to move forward into the future.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, we're at critically low levels of water in Lake Mead, and we're very close to a Tier 1 shortage for water, which means forced water restrictions for all of Arizona's residents. This is a hugely important issue for our future and for economic development, and it's also a bipartisan issue, so we need to work together on this, and conservation is going to have to be a part of this. We need to start from square one, involve everyone, and be proactive with water management for our future and for our state. Only 3% of our water comes from reclaimed water. We need to be doing a better job at reclaiming water. This can be accomplished through increased infrastructure, such as increased groundwater recharge stations. Tempe had a lot of infrastructure early, so they are prepared for drought. Tempe is the most population-dense city in the valley, but they have the highest water table because of planning and infrastructure. We must be aggressive with our reclamation of water and conservative with our use. Thank you.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response?
The only response I would offer, because I think Kathy had a lot more specific information in her answer, I would just add that in Arizona, because we have faced this situation of drought in the past, it's something that I think we need to consider strongly is what is our emergency plan? You know, what will we do if things get dire? And we have to think about that to plan for the future.
Thank you. Next question. What are your plans or proposals for improving our air quality? Kathy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Well, I would really like to see clean energy become our primary source of energy in the state. So I support Proposition 127. If this proposition passes, we will see dramatic reduced rates of chronic breathing difficulties, heart disease, and even premature death. 1 in 9 children in Arizona suffer with chronic breathing difficulties. My daughter is one of them. Also, this proposition will create about 15,000 jobs in the renewable energy sector, according to a new study by the National Resource Defense Council. We will be keeping the jobs of the future in Arizona, and it will mean lower energy costs for Arizona's families and businesses, which of course is good for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yeah, I agree that clean air is critically important, not only from an environmental standpoint and an ecological standpoint, but as Kathy said, also from a healthcare standpoint. You know, the dirtier and more polluted our air becomes, the more and more people are going to be diagnosed with asthma or other chronic breathing problems. And so that creates an additional burden also on our healthcare in the state. And I would just reiterate that this is another issue where I am doing a lot of research and a lot of learning and a lot of listening, because I think that's very important for someone in my situation to make sure that I am understanding this issue as best as I can.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
Well, clean air is important, obviously, for the sustainability and viability of our planet. It's also, I think, our moral responsibility to, take care of our planet for our future generations. It's heartbreaking to me to imagine going or not being able to go up to the Woods Canyon Lake. My daughter and I go up there all the time, because the increasing temperatures is killing our forests, our ponderosa pine forests. I can't imagine what it would be like to not be able to go and literally hug a tree. Ponderosa pine, they smell like, some people say vanilla. I think they smell like butterscotch. That's something that I think is my moral obligation to protect for my daughter so that she can share that stuff with her daughter.
Thank you. And candidates, Johnny, we'll start with you here. Please let the audience know what your stance is on charter schools.
Great question.
Mm-hmm.
So as I mentioned earlier, I am an advocate for public education here in Arizona. With that being said, I support excellence in all of our schools, and I don't think that we need to be looking at this always as an us versus them situation. Now, I'm planning to vote no on Prop 305, and this is because the expansion of private school tax vouchers drains money out of our public education system. It is taking money away from public schools and diverting that money in a way that's not very accountable and that lacks significant oversight. So ultimately, I think we need charter school reform, specifically when it comes to procurement rules. I think charter schools should be abiding by the same rules as our public schools are. However, I, again, do support excellence in all of our schools, just not at the expense of any one particular group of students or teachers.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, current state law impedes investigation of charter schools. That's because the legislature has exempted charter schools from procurement and conflict of interest laws that traditional schools are subject to. I think we should pass legislation that allows the state auditor general to investigate the finances of charter schools. We should pass legislation that requires charter schools to segregate public funds from private funds in business related or tied to the charter school. And I think we should pass legislation that gives the Arizona State Board for Charter Schools more oversight powers.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response? Thank you. Candidates, if elected, you will most likely be in the minority. So that being said, how do you plan to promote your proposed legislation given the likely opposition that you may very well face? Kathy?
That's a great question, thank you. I believe my skills as a psychotherapist have uniquely qualified me for being bipartisan, being able to reach across the aisle and include, the Republican perspective in any and all issues. I deal with people that are stakeholders in their families, and they have very, very contentious relationships, and I'm able to help find solutions. So I believe that those skill sets will translate well to the legislature.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yeah, I've told folks since the beginning of this process that I am an independent who is running as a Democrat. I think that's an important distinction to make because I really am not a big fan of extreme partisanship. I think the divisive rhetoric coming from the leadership in both parties is extremely damaging and harmful. However, like Kathy, I believe that my past experiences has uniquely prepared me to reach across the aisle and work with stakeholders from a variety of interests. I mean, as an interfaith activist, you're bringing together atheists and Christians and Muslims and Jews to discuss very important fundamental differences and disagreements. So I think I can handle Democrats and Republicans and independents together in the same room. And I just add, as I said earlier, my parents are Republicans who live in this district. I am a Democrat. We get along great. We have a loving and respectful relationship, and I want to extend that same courtesy and civility to my neighbors, regardless of if they are registered Republicans, Democrats, Green Party, Libertarian, or anything in between. I think everybody's voice deserves to be heard and listened to by their representatives. That's the job.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
I agree with Johnny. It's important that all voices have a seat at the table. That's the grist for the mill. The disagreements really is part of the process of coming up with or arriving at viable solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Johnny, what specific decisions made by incumbent legislators in LD 25 are you opposed to?
Great question. I actually have spent a lot of time reviewing both Representative Bowers and Representative Udall's voting records. I've also spent time watching them speak in committee on a number of issues. So I want to first state clearly that I have a lot of respect for both of my opponents. And I think that's important because there is not a lot of respect in our political dialogue today. So you're never going to hear me personally attack either of them, but I do have significant disagreements, particularly when it comes to the way these legislators have voted in the interest of public schools, or I guess I should say not in the interest of our public schools. Also, when it comes to things like the pro-life and pro-choice debate, there have been a number of bills that have been introduced that I would say are very misogynistic, frankly. And unfortunately, I regret to inform you in the room, if you didn't know already, but Representative Bowers did vote in support of legislation that would require women who are seeking abortion services to explain reasons as to why they're seeking this service from their doctor. And he actually sponsored similar bills. So that's something that I find extremely unfortunate. There's most of the votes that Representative Bowers has voted on in the last year, I would vote the opposite way. So it's a pretty cut and dry difference.
Thank you. Kathy?
I was deeply offended by a bill that Senator Worsley sponsored. I don't remember the actual number, but it was a racketeering bill. What the bill would have done was, if there had been a demonstration and the demonstration became violent, the people who were the organizers of the demonstration would have been held fiscally and personally responsible for the actions of other people. This was actually one of the reasons why I'm running, because it just so aggravated me. I was the main organizer for one of the demonstrations down at the Capitol on Environmental Day, environmental issues. And thank God it was a peaceful demonstration, and everyone, was behaved accordingly. But that would have been me if that had become violent. I would have lost potentially my car, my home. I just don't think that's fair. This bill would have curtailed my right to free speech and my right to peaceful protest. Thank you.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response.
I would just add on to that. I agree with Kathy's assessment of those bills. There is a number of issues wrapped up in that legislation. I think not only free speech, which is interesting to me that Representatives Bowers and Udall would not support free speech, but also the racketeering and protest laws. One of them is specifically, I view it as a bill that is anti-religious freedom, which is an issue that both representatives have stated is important to them in the past. It prevents individuals from wearing a face covering during a public demonstration. I have friends who are Muslim women who cover their faces, and this is basically a law preventing them from gathering in public.
Thank you. Candidates, per the Goldwater Institute, Arizona taxpayers are responsible for around $60 billion in debt and have paid over $20 billion in interest over the last 15 years. What action will you take to address this issue? Kathy.
Well, I think we need to revisit Prop 108. In 2017, the legislature voted on a budget of $9.8 billion, and at the same time, the Arizona Economic Statistics Commission determined the appropriations limit for the legislature, which is based on 7.41% of Arizona's income. In 2017, that projection figure was $22.1 billion. That's the amount they're allowed to spend by way of taxes. The difference between the $22.1 billion in appropriations and the $9.8 billion expenses gets shifted to cities, counties, colleges, and school districts. This expense is covered by override votes and bonds, and about half of these overrides and bonds are voted on by the public. And probably most significant is that we're paying interest on these bonds. Since 2002, we have paid $13 billion in interest, $1.9 billion of that in 2016. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny?
I agree with Kathy. Proposition 108, which is Article 9, Section 22 of Arizona's Constitution, basically requires that there be a supermajority vote in both chambers of the legislature in order for any tax revenue increase to take place. So that means that 2/3 of the House and the Senate have to approve the bill. On the flip side, however, to cut taxes, to reduce revenue coming into the budget, only requires a simple majority. So because of this dynamic, over the years, the budget has been starved to the point where we're at now, where we can't even pay for essential government functions and services. So if we're going to address this issue, we need to offer a repeal of Prop 108, which we can do at the legislature by putting that decision in the hands of the citizens, in the hands of the voters. We need to do that, as I said before, because we need more revenue in the budget in order to pay for teacher salaries, in order to pay for better infrastructure, in order to fix our highways and our roads. These are things that we need to do, and we need the money to do it. So Proposition 108 is something that both Kathy and I hope to address as legislators.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
I yield.
Mm-hmm. Johnny, the Arizona legislature has, quote unquote, rolled over a $930 million Prop 301 debt owed to Arizona K through 12 school districts for 7 years. Neither Prop 123 nor Governor Ducey's 20% by 2020 addresses this debt left over from the 08-09 recession. How do you propose the AZ school districts be paid back?
Well, we can start the process of paying them back by electing a legislature that is going to act in the interests of our teachers and our students. It's upsetting to me that right now we seem to have a very reactionary state government. I was very proud to see teachers march on the Capitol with the Red for Ed movement, and the frustrating thing is that it shouldn't have taken that extreme response to get the governor to listen to our teachers. It shouldn't have taken that much, and the measure that he's offering doesn't even take into account all of the funding that's been taken away over the years. So it's really not what's being presented. It's an attempt to, in an election year, appear a certain way. And that's what's happening with, I think, a lot of elected officials right now who are afraid of losing their power and losing their positions, is they're starting to want to appear as though they are allies of public education, that they are defenders of our public schools. But I think that's simply not the case. If you're the group that was responsible for us losing all that funding in the first place, you can't also claim to be the ones who are going to fix it. We need new legislators. We need a new, in my opinion, we need a new governor.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, I'd like to agree with Johnny. I think that it was ridiculous that the teachers had to walk out on students in order to get the governor to pay attention to the fact that I had one constituent who told me that he was subsidizing his daughter's income. His daughter was a teacher. It was just unconscionable. I think that we can find money in some of the corporate tax loopholes that we have going on. I also think we can find some money to pay back the system through special line items, like there's the Freedom School up at NAU. This is an ideological school, and it's being funded by state tax money. So I think we can find the money if we just do a line-by-line audit of the budget.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response? Okay. Kathy, what is your position on the role of labor unions in Arizona as a right-to-work state?
Well, I wish that we had more labor unions in our state, because that would definitely help with our wages, which are really, really low. When I was a teacher, I was part of the teachers union. I subsequently went to a charter school and ran into difficulty at that school, and I didn't have a union to back me up, and it was very frustrating to try and negotiate with the owner of the school on my own. So I strongly support unions. I wish, like I said, I wish there were more, because it would definitely help with wages, and ultimately that would benefit Arizona's children, because 1 in 4 children in Arizona live in poverty. So I would like to see better wages in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a supporter of unions. I think the right of workers to organize themselves and to petition their employer for better working conditions, for better wages, I think that's a fundamental right that we ought to protect here in the state. Unfortunately, the way things currently are, we are a right-to-work state, so union activity is severely limited in a number of areas. And I would hope to be able to pass legislation that would give unions more autonomy and to give them more agency over how they interact and what types of activities they engage in.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
I support unions. Thank you.
Thank you. If elected, what steps would you take to continue to diversify Arizona's economy, and what industries or sectors would you focus on? Johnny?
Clean energy, I think, is a very important industry for growth here in Arizona. I think it's an industry where we have not yet taken advantage of all that our beautiful state has to offer, specifically when it comes to solar energy. Some other industries, though, that I also think are important include technology and the information sector. I think this is a great opportunity for growth, especially for entrepreneurs and for small businesses. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, and I think there's always an assumption that there is one party that's more pro-business and another party that is not as pro-business. And I think that's a fallacy, because I think if you'll look at the policies that Kathy and I want to introduce, we are actually allies and supporters of small businesses and small business owners. So I hope that we are going to be able to really diversify Arizona's economy by introducing policies that are favorable to those who want to start or grow their businesses.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, I agree with Johnny that clean energy is the sector that has probably the most potential. As I mentioned previously, there's 15,000 jobs attached to the clean energy sector. I also support small business. I think that we need to be not offering incentives exclusively to big businesses. We need to incentivize opening small businesses and making sure that the mom and pops are able to compete fairly with the large corporations.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response.
I yield.
Thank you. Kathy, what recommendations do you have for improving public school safety?
Well, the March for Our Lives group is my constituency, and they've asked for, hold on just a second, I've got my notes.
Mm-hmm.
They want universal background checks and closing the gun show loopholes. They also want a ban on bump stocks. And I think probably most significantly, they want an increase in mental health professionals on campus. Right now, there is one counselor for every 903 students. That's the average. And what the March for Our Lives kids would like is one counselor for every 250 students. I spoke with a friend who's a police officer, and he also suggested bottlenecking our campuses. I know Westwood does a really good job of this. You know, you have to go through the office in order to get onto campus. And you know, there's doors that close behind, so once you're off campus, you're off campus. So I think making our campuses more secure and safe in that kind of fashion would also help out with our school system.
Thank you. Johnny?
Yep, I agree with a number of the measures that Kathy has suggested. Most importantly, for me, would be increasing the presence of healthcare or mental health professionals on campus, especially counselors. And it comes back to the whole conversation we're having earlier about the state of education. It's not just a teacher shortage that we're experiencing, it's also a shortage of counselors and other administrative and support staff in our schools who are facing many of the same issues of being underpaid and undervalued. So I think we would be able to address some of the concerns about safety on school campuses by looking at making sure that our students are being taken care of holistically, not just that they're being encouraged to become productive members of society by getting good jobs, but also that they're being taken care of emotionally, mentally, and you know, treating them as holistic people and not simply as future employees.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response?
I yield.
Okay. Johnny, how would you propose reducing opioid abuse in our state?
I think this is a really serious issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really sad crisis that Arizona is going through. A lot of lives are being lost because of opioid addiction and because of irresponsible pharmacists and doctors who are prescribing more opioids than ought to be legally allowed. However, I do think that this is an issue that is being addressed in a sort of bipartisan way right now. And it's actually one of the few issues I think I've been able to look at and say, I think this is being addressed well. Of course, there's still a crisis, but we've seen with this issue that Republicans and Democrats have come together to say, we got to do something. We got to do something to address the crisis. I think there's more that still needs to be done, especially in terms of oversight with prescription medications. But again, I would actually commend the governor and the legislature for the steps that they have taken to start addressing this.
Thank you. Kathy?
I agree with the governor's opioid crisis plan. I think that increased mental health services in the community would certainly help with the addiction. I believe that we need to be treating this as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Johnny, your 30-second response.
We also should seek to reduce the stigma associated with having an addiction and with asking for help.
Thank you. What do you think can be done to reduce recidivism in Arizona? Kathy?
Education, in a word. I would like to see a lot more education opportunity in jail and prison. I also believe that if we have strong schools and schools that are well funded, we'll be able to prevent people from being incarcerated because they will have a lot of opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have without education.
Thank you. Johnny?
Ban private prisons. Private prisons do not have any incentive to reduce recidivism. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Private prisons have a financial profit-making incentive to increase recidivism, because if you are in jail or in prison and you serve your time and are released and then something happens and you end up back in jail and you're incarcerated once again, the stakeholders who own stock in that private prison company make more money. So why would we trust companies and businesses that have a profit-making incentive on filling jail cells with Arizona citizens? Why would we think that they are going to offer restorative justice? They won't. They don't have any reason to do so. So I think that's step one. Step two is making sure that, as Kathy said, that we have a strong education system, because strong schools equal safe neighborhoods. And then we should also make sure that we're offering services for reentry. That means job training services for people who are being released. That means making sure that there's healthcare options available for them, and that if they're struggling with addiction or some sort of drug issue, that they're going to be able to find the avenues to get themselves some help.
Thank you. And Kathy, your 30-second response.
I'd also like to see skill training in addition to just general education in the prison system. In Wisconsin, they are providing skill training for inmates, and when they get out of prison, they have a $15 an hour job to go to. In fact, for low violent offenders, they are able to start to work while they're still incarcerated. So I would love to see a lot more skills training in prison.
Thank you. And at this time, we will transition to the second part of the debate, where each of the candidates will receive a separate question with 1 minute to respond. Additionally, the other candidate will have an optional 30 seconds to address the question. And remember, you may still submit questions via the note cards and direct them to specific candidates. So the first question is for Johnny. And Kathy touched on this a little bit, but what is your position on increasing educational and vocational training in prisons to reduce recidivism?
I think that's absolutely important, and I misunderstood Kathy at the beginning of her response when she said education, but I actually think education in both senses is important. Not only education for inmates or for individuals who are about to be released, who are going through the reentry process, but also education as a baseline for everyone in our communities. I think both of those things are important. I think that the costs associated with providing these services can be covered, once again, by increasing revenue to the state budget, which is a priority for both myself and for Dr. Kathy Moore-Almeida.
Thank you. And Kathy, how do you plan specifically to defeat your Republican opponents?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. I believe that being forthcoming is incredibly important. I also believe that putting the public interest before my own interest is paramount to this position. I have been working really, really hard. I've been knocking on a lot of doors. I've been meeting a lot of voters, and hopefully, people will choose me.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, but Johnny, did you want to chime in on what Kathy said there?
I think that Kathy can defeat her opponent because she's a better candidate. So I'm also looking forward to supporting her and voting for her, and I've been knocking doors for her as well. I think you may be asking in relation to me and how I plan to defeat my opponents, but we really are in this together. I plan to do that the same way by meeting as many of my neighbors as possible, having frank and honest conversations about why I'm running and why I want to earn your vote. And then lastly, I think just the message of making sure that there's representation for everyone who lives in District 25 is catching on, and people are responding to it.
Thank you. And Johnny, what is your position on requiring police officers to wear body cameras?
I really like this idea, so I want to tell you a quick story. I don't know how many of you are familiar with an app called Countable, but there's this really cool app that basically lets you track what's going on in Congress at any given time. It will alert you with a notification on your phone if your representative or senator is voting on a bill. The other really cool thing that it allows you to do is it streamlines the process of contacting your representative. So the first time I ever used Countable to contact Senators Flake and McCain was to ask for legislation that would ensure that there are body cameras on all police officers in the state of Arizona. I thought it was really cool that I was able to send that message very quickly. I think, again, there's a cost associated with this, but it is a cost that can easily be covered if we get rid of the tax cuts and tax breaks that have been offered to wealthy corporations over the years.
Thank you. And Kathy, did you want to chime in for 30 seconds?
I do believe that we need to demilitarize our police force, and having policemen wear body cams is a good way to hold them accountable.
Thank you. And Kathy, what is your position on the legalization of recreational marijuana?
I support that.
Thank you. And Johnny?
I
30
also
seconds?
support this legislation.
Okay. Johnny, what is your position on the state's decision to expand the Medicaid program?
I think this was a good decision. I was not the biggest fan of Governor Jan Brewer, but expanding Medicaid access in Arizona is something that I do think was a positive step during her tenure. I think it's something that's crucially important, and in addition to just expanding Medicaid access, I would love to see the option for individuals and businesses who don't meet the Medicaid, don't meet the minimum requirement to be able to actually buy into Medicaid as a way of providing more options for example, for businesses, for their employees, in paying for health insurance, but also for individuals who are in need of that sort of healthcare option.
Thank you.
And Kathy, did you want to chime in for
I
30
do.
seconds? Mhm.
Yeah, I believe that we should guarantee healthcare as a right of citizenship by enacting a single-payer healthcare system and being able to negotiate on prescription drugs. I think that the expansion of access to include a public option in Arizona would be a tremendous first step. I personally am paying $780 a month for a private health policy, and I would love to be able to have some place to go where I could get a cheaper and better coverage, a better plan.
Thank you. And Kathy, what is your position on tax exemptions for the rich and for businesses?
Well, I believe that people have profited from things that taxes have paid for, such as roads and lights and the infrastructure that we have, and so I believe that it's important for them to pay their fair share.
Thank you. Johnny, did you want to chime in for 30 seconds?
Some things in Arizona that aren't taxed: private jet sales, fine art sales, selling horses, 4-inch pipes.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
So, first of all, I think with those first three things I mentioned, you can imagine a certain type of person who's most likely to be engaging in that sort of transaction would have a certain socioeconomic status, likely to be a wealthy individual. 4-inch pipes is because we have a 4-inch pipe company manufacturer that lobbied so that they wouldn't have to pay taxes to do business in Arizona. So again, these things happen in the past, and then we move on, and everybody sort of forgets that we gave this massive tax break that's draining money from our state budget. We need to increase revenue. We need to start going back in the opposite direction. So that's going to mean making sure it's not taxing the wealthy. It's not levying new taxes on the wealthy. It's getting rid of the tax cuts and tax breaks we probably should have never gave them in the first place, but that have long since expired past their usefulness.
Thank you. And Johnny, what are your thoughts on Arizona's immigration policy and the impact that it's had on our economy?
Well, I will start by just saying that I have a number of friends who are undocumented Americans. So to me, trust-based public safety is extremely important. Somebody should not be afraid to call the police when their house is broken into because they're afraid that this is going to end up being a question about their citizenship or their legal status in the country. We want to make sure that everybody who lives here feels safe and feels included. Immigration is something that's addressed at the federal level, so it's not like Kathy and I would be, really trying to, or we wouldn't even have the opportunity to offer immigration reform as much as I think that's something that's needed. But we would be able to make sure that legislation that we pass doesn't treat someone differently because of their status.
Thank you. Kathy, did you want to chime in?
I do. I'm appalled that we are separating children from their parents at the border. It's unconscionable, and I just can't imagine what that's got to be like, both for the child and the parent. We need a streamlined immigration policy so that people who are seeking asylum because their home countries are violent can get into our country legally and quickly.
Thank you. And Kathy, what are your thoughts? And as a legislator, what would you do to combat the special interests and priorities of lobbyists and special interest groups?
Well, being responsive to my constituency is the best way to avoid, I think, special interests. I'm a clean elections candidate, and so I work for the people that I represent, not for any special interests. So I think keeping my nose clean and not taking any bribes or any under the table funding is paramount. I have to be transparent and honest, and stick to my own sense of morality.
Thank you. And Johnny, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, not taking their money would be the first and most important thing. It ensures that we can keep our integrity as candidates and as legislators. Not taking special interests, PAC money, that is step one. Step two for me is also making sure that they can't monopolize my time if elected. We have seen that there is a propensity for legislators to always make sure that they take the lobbyists meeting first over the meetings with their constituents, and I would like to do the opposite. If I have time left over after meeting with you all and our neighbors and the families who live here, then I would meet with a lobbyist.
Thank you. Johnny, according to Arizona food banks, nearly 1 in 6 adults and almost 1 in 4 children in Arizona struggle with food insecurity. So how would you use your influence in the legislature to address this hunger problem?
Making sure that we have SNAP funding, of course, is extremely important. SNAP funding ensures that there is food options available for people who are in food insecure situations. And so that funding has been threatened in the past as another area for people who want to cut taxes and who want to cut costs and cut expenses. And I think that's something that we need to make sure doesn't happen. We need to protect that funding to make sure that there is, you know, a safety net for people who need it. I also appreciate that the way Arizona laws are written, the food that we use for SNAP and for other government programs is actually locally grown. So it kind of has the additional benefit of like helping our own agriculture, like our own farmers, our agricultural industry, and our businesses in Arizona. So,
Thank you.
pleasure.
And Kathy, did you want to chime in?
I have many clients that are on WIC, and it's paramount to their family's well-being. So I support you know, the funding of these types of programs.
Thank you. And Kathy, according to a study published in 2018 by the Association of American Medical Colleges, the U.S. could see a shortage of 120,000 physicians by 2030. So what do you think the legislature can do to prevent this shortage in Arizona?
Well, this goes back to you know, college. We have in our state constitution a mandate that education should be free or as close to free as possible. So we need to make sure that we have free or affordable public college in Arizona with regular budgetary audits to ensure competitiveness in funding and good use of taxpayer money. So as you know, it costs about $25,000 a year right now for tuition, and so you're looking at about $100,000 just to graduate in 4 years if you're able to graduate within 4 years. So we need to make sure that our higher education funding is intact so that we can afford and attract people to become doctors.
Thank you. And Johnny?
If I could just clarify before answering, you said 120,000.
Said that the U.S. could see a shortage of 120,000 physicians by 2030.
Okay. With a question like that obviously has some very specific data behind it, and probably a source that can explain more about why that is expected to be the case. What are some of the inherent problems that would cause that sort of shortage? It's one of those things where I feel like it's important as a legislator who has decision-making power to make sure you do your homework, to make sure you do the research that's required. I wouldn't want to just spit out my knee-jerk reaction to that question without making sure that I fully understand that problem and what potential solutions could fix it. So I would cautiously say that that's something I would look at.
Thank you. And at this time, we're going to transition to our closing statements, and the first closing statement will be given by Johnny. Please.
Thank you very much. And thank you all again for being here. Thanks to the Clean Elections Commission for hosting us. I really appreciated this opportunity to share a little bit more about why I'm running and some of the things I hope to do. It's not enough time to give you the full story of how I got into this, or to talk about every issue that impacts us in this room and our families. But I hope I've given you a sense that what I want to do is restore integrity and trust in our legislature, and to give people who live here in District 25 a voice. Right now, you are represented by 3 individuals of the same party, the same ideology, who are doing a great job of representing the people who live here that have that ideology, but the rest of us are being left out and ignored. So I want to give you a voice, and I want to raise teacher pay, ban private prisons, protect clean elections, protect the Citizens Ballot Initiative, and create a more inclusive community here in Mesa.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, thank you everyone for being here this evening, and my thanks to the online viewers for their viewership. I've enjoyed participating in this debate. I'm running for state office because I care deeply about our community's well-being. As an educator and psychotherapist, I have the skill sets needed to bring together multiple stakeholders to solve problems. I look forward to serving you in the Arizona Senate, and I hope that I've earned your vote this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And to both of you, thank you so much for participating in our forum. And to our audience members, we thank all of you who took the time to come and inform yourselves before voting. We encourage all of you to visit www.azcleanelections.gov/voter dashboard for a more customized experience to find information on the election, the candidates, the issues, and to view this debate on demand. And we encourage you and ask that you please fill out the debate evaluation form and return it to our volunteers, as your feedback is very important to the commission and will help to improve future debates. And thank you all for coming tonight, and you're welcome to stay and speak directly with each of the candidates. Good night.